It began with a simple request, an invitation sent from a popular British broadcaster to Buckingham Palace and Mar-a-Lago. The idea? A special televised discussion between King Charles III and former President Donald Trump, under the guise of a transatlantic dialogue on leadership in a changing world. Most assumed Charles would decline. He didn't. When the palace confirmed his participation, the media exploded. Pundits from London to Washington predicted sparks, scandals, or silence. No one expected diplomacy. And they certainly didn't expect Charles to be the one stepping into a lion's den. The studio was a neutral setting, soft lighting, polished wood, subtle Union Jacks and stars and stripes behind two chairs placed awkwardly close. Trump arrived first, grinning for the cameras, straightening his tie with exaggerated confidence. He asked if there would be applause. There wouldn't. Charles entered minutes later. No grand gesture. No entourage, just presence. Regal yet restrained. He sat with quiet dignity, nodding once to the host, then briefly to Trump, who offered a half-smile and muttered, "Didn't know King still did interviews." Charles didn't respond. Not with words, anyway. His silence wasn't passive, it was deliberate. The host welcomed viewers across both nations and beyond. Tonight, we explore the future of leadership, tradition, and global values. Trump jumped in before any questions were asked. Let me start by saying, it's great to be here. And I've always said, Americans love royalty. We love it. But let's be honest, kings, crowns, it's all very medieval, isn't it? The camera cut to Charles, calm, composed. The crown, he said softly, is not about gold or glamour. It's about duty, something I trust you may find difficult to grasp. The room froze. So did Trump, just for a second. A king had just thrown the first spark. Trump chuckled, but it was hollow. Duty, please. I've built empires, created jobs. You inherited castles and jewels. Don't lecture me on work. Charles didn't blink. Empires built on branding, he said, can crumble with a tweet. Empires built on silence endure longer, but that silence comes at a cost. The host tried to steer the discussion back to the topic, tradition and modern governance, but the energy had shifted. This wasn't a panel. It was a duel. Trump leaned forward. Let's face it, Charles. The monarchy's a show. Pretty parades, fancy uniforms. But real leadership, it happens in the trenches. In business, in elections. Not in palaces. Charles sat back, hands clasped. And yet, here we are. Two men with very different lives, summoned not by title or ballot, but by relevance. Trump smirked. Your relevance comes from Netflix shows. Mine comes from votes. Votes you've questioned, Charles replied, when they didn't suit you. The studio crew tensed. The host blinked rapidly, unsure if he should step in. But neither man flinched. Charles's tone was even. Measured. You ridicule ceremony, but crave attention. You dismiss tradition, but rewrite your own legacy daily. I wear a crown you mock, yet you'd wear one tomorrow if your base let you. Trump pointed a finger, voice rising. Careful, Charles. You don't know America. And you don't know restraint, Charles said, colder now. This wasn't just about governance anymore. It was ego versus legacy, spectacle versus substance. The tension in the studio could be sliced with a blade. And the world, watching live, couldn't look away. The moderator finally found his voice. Gentlemen, perhaps we can focus on the theme, cultural continuity in a changing world? But Trump waved him off. Let the king speak. I'm curious, how do you justify existing on taxpayer money while preaching humility? Charles's expression didn't change. I don't justify it. I acknowledge it. And I return more than I take, through duty, stability, and a symbol that outlasts political tantrums. Trump leaned back, clearly amused. So you're the mascot of patience. Great. Meanwhile, I've built towers on 5 continents. Charles turned, voice low. Built them with what? Steel or spectacle? The audience stirred. Trump's smile faltered. Charles continued. Legacy isn't cement and gold signs. It's how you're remembered by those you didn't pay to clap. The host tried again to interject. We're not here to debate personal success. Oh, but we are, Charles said quietly. Because the world you represent, Mr. Trump, isn't just loud. It's fleeting. And the world I represent, though flawed, endures. Trump's voice dropped. Endures? For how long? You're in a gilded cage. I walked through fire. And yet, Charles replied, eyes locked on his opponent, you're the one who still needs applause. The words echoed through the studio. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. For the first time, Trump didn't have a retort. Because deep down, he knew, this wasn't just a king in a chair. It was a man who had learned how to wear history without choking on it. The debate moved to global influence. The moderator asked about leadership in times of crisis, but the question barely landed before Trump pounced. You see, Charles, when I speak, markets move. When I act, borders shift. What happens when you speak? Another documentary on Netflix? Laughter erupted from the American side of the audience. Charles didn't blink. When I speak, Mr. Trump, people pause. Because my words aren't for transaction. They're for reflection. Trump crossed his arms. And what's that worth in a world of power? Everything, Charles said. Because power without reflection is just noise with a crown. A silence fell. Then Charles stood, not aggressively, but like someone rising from centuries, not seconds. Leadership is not about volume. It's about velocity. Yours aims to disrupt. Mine aims to steady. Trump scoffed. You steady nothing. You're a figurehead. Charles stepped forward. Then why are you so rattled by a figurehead? Trump's mouth opened, then shut. Across the hall, aides whispered. Viewers online clipped the moment instantly, one frame, Trump frozen, Charles calm. It spread like wildfire. For a brief second, Charles scanned the audience, not to gloat, but to measure the weight of what had just passed between them. This was not a debate about titles anymore. It was about tone. And Charles had mastered something Trump never understood, when to speak softly and still strike harder. The moderator turned the discussion toward the future of Western alliances. Charles clasped his hands calmly, speaking with the ease of a man who had watched empires bend and break long before Twitter ever existed. The bonds we hold, he said, are not dictated by hashtags or trending outrage. They are centuries old, built not on impulse but on obligation. Trump interrupted. Obligation? To who? The world doesn't need kings anymore, it needs winners. And what have you won, Donald? Charles asked softly. Trump leaned in. More votes than you'll ever get. A few supporters chuckled. Charles, still unmoved, replied, you chase applause. I carry legacy. The difference? Yours ends with a headline. Mine endures in history. A hush swept the room. Even the moderator didn't speak. Charles continued, not loud, not theatrical, but with gravitas. The world needs fewer men shouting over each other, and more who listen before they lead. Trump's face reddened, but Charles never looked directly at him again. He was now speaking to the room, to the audience at home, to history itself. You call me outdated. But look around, Mr. Trump. When the world trembles, people still look to Buckingham, not because we command, but because we represent continuity in chaos. Trump tried to interject. Charles raised one hand, not to silence, but to conclude. I don't demand relevance. I embody it. And if that makes you uncomfortable, it means the crown still matters. No fireworks. No threats. Just words, heavy, royal, final. And for the first time that evening, even Trump seemed unsure how to respond. Trump shifted in his seat, lips pursed, eyes scanning the audience as if searching for applause that never quite came. The confidence he'd carried in earlier remarks now seemed bruised by Charles's precision. "You speak like your name alone earns respect," Trump fired back. "But respect has to be earned." Charles tilted his head. "Indeed. And some spend lifetimes shouting for it, while others carry it quietly through centuries." A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. Trump stood now, gesturing broadly. "I built towers. Businesses. A brand recognized on every continent. And yet," Charles replied evenly, "you seem desperate to remind everyone of it." The line landed like a stone in still water. Trump laughed, a short, hollow sound. "You're just a symbol, Charles. A museum piece in a modern world." The king didn't flinch. "Symbols, Mr. Trump, are what people reach for when truth is too large to hold. And when democracies crack, they do not turn to slogans. They turn to symbols." There was no cheering, no clapping, just a silence that felt carved from stone. Charles stood, not towering, but grounded. "You built skyscrapers. I was born inside a story that predates them." Trump narrowed his gaze. "You think stories matter more than action?" Charles approached the edge of the platform, eyes firm but calm. "Stories are action, Mr. Trump. They shape memory, identity, nations. Yours may fill bookshelves. Mine fills history." A long pause. Then, with a voice both quiet and thunderous, "And history, unlike branding, cannot be bought." The tension in the room could be sliced with a whisper. Neither man sat. It wasn't a debate anymore, it was theater, and every diplomat, journalist, and aide was now an involuntary witness to a scene none would forget. Trump leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "You think your monarchy is above reproach? You hide behind jewels and processions while real leaders take risks." Charles's reply came slowly. "And what risk is greater than restraint?" Trump blinked. Charles continued, stepping closer. "To hold power and not wield it recklessly, that is risk. To bear history on one's shoulders and still choose silence over spectacle, that is strength." Trump scoffed. "You call silence strength? Sounds like fear in a velvet robe." But Charles only smiled faintly. "No. Fear is needing noise to feel powerful." Aides behind them exchanged glances. Trump jabbed a finger toward the crown emblem behind Charles. "That crown represents centuries of empire, exploitation, control. You call it heritage. The rest of the world remembers pain. And I carry that truth daily," Charles said without flinching. "But acknowledging scars doesn't mean denying the body." A hush fell. "I've never claimed perfection," Charles continued. "But I don't run from my nation's past. I wear it. I carry it. And I answer for it, with more than sound bites." Trump's jaw tightened. "You answer with symbolism. I act." The king's reply came like the quiet before a storm. "And what has your action built? Division? Doubt? Fear wrapped in flags?" Trump opened his mouth, but said nothing. Because for a moment, perhaps, he recognized that the man before him wasn't just a monarch. He was a mirror. And Trump didn't like what he saw in it. Trump took a deep breath, as if choosing his next move with the care of a chess player backed into a corner. I built towers. You inherited walls, he muttered. You don't know the first thing about earning power. Charles didn't answer right away. He turned toward the grand fireplace, where the flames danced beneath the royal crest. Inheritance isn't about gold or marble, he said at last. It's about consequence. And I never asked for this weight, Mr. Trump. But I carry it because it was handed to me, flawed, heavy, and watched by millions. The words hung in the air like smoke. Trump stepped forward, slower now. Then maybe it's time to put it down. The world's moved on. You're a museum piece. Perhaps, Charles replied coolly, but even museum pieces remind us who we once were, and warn us of what we could become again. For a moment, Trump's mouth opened, then closed. I've stood at the tombs of kings who ruled with fear, Charles said. I've read the letters of soldiers who died thinking it was for honor. And I've signed bills for children who have no idea what a crown even means. Do you think I take this lightly? Trump shook his head. You're still clinging to symbolism. And yet, Charles added, turning to face him fully, you flew across an ocean to confront that very symbol. Curious. A faint, awkward laughter bubbled from the corner of the room. A few aides looked down, suddenly invested in their notepads. The king stepped closer. You mock crowns because they're easy targets. But what you fail to see is that the real test isn't how loudly you speak, it's whether your words endure once the room is empty. Trump's stare hardened, but his voice dropped. And if they don't? Charles looked past him now, toward the tall windows overlooking Westminster. Then history will record your roar, and my echo. The tension in the chamber had shifted. No longer a battle of bravado, it had become something colder, more calculated. Trump straightened his tie, his eyes narrowing. You still think speeches and ceremony can hold back the tide. But I've dealt with storms before. I don't get swept away. Charles gave a faint nod. Storms pass. Institutions remain. Institutions crumble, Trump shot back. Especially when they pretend to stand for everyone and end up protecting no one. Charles tilted his head slightly. You speak of collapse as if it's a solution. I speak of adaptation. That's the difference between a builder and a steward. Trump leaned forward, voice low. And what exactly are you stewarding? Tradition? That crown on your head doesn't feed the hungry. It doesn't fix the world. No, Charles agreed. But it reminds us of the promises we failed to keep. Symbols matter, Mr. Trump, not because they save us, but because they force us to ask why we still need saving. Trump hesitated, just briefly. I've walked among fire, Charles continued, voice tightening, Grenfell, Manchester, floods in Wales, tragedies that didn't make headlines in Mar-a-Lago. I shook the hands of mothers who buried their sons in uniforms sewn by forgotten hands. Do you know what they asked for? Not flags. Not slogans. Dignity. Trump looked toward the ceiling as if trying to dismiss the words, but they followed him. Tell me, Charles pressed, if I'm just a relic, why does your base still talk about monarchy with such obsession? Why do your tabloids still measure worth in crowns and scandals? Trump's smirk faded. You came here to take a shot at the crown, Charles said. But you forgot something. Trump raised an eyebrow. What's that? The king straightened. Crowns don't fall by shouting. They fall when their silence no longer serves the people. And I've decided, I won't be silent anymore. The room didn't applaud. It didn't need to. The silence following Charles's final words wasn't empty, it was deafening. For a man often accused of being too diplomatic, too restrained, something had cracked. And it wasn't weakness. It was resolve. Trump stood, not in defiance, but confusion. So, is this your little royal moment? You think you've just won something? Charles stepped forward, his voice firm but not raised. I didn't come here to win. I came to remind you that some thrones are built on service, not spectacle. You lecture the world, Trump said, his arms wide. But Britain's no saint. You've got blood in your archives, just like anyone else. The king didn't deny it. We do. And perhaps that's the point. You cover your sins in red hats and rally chants. We face ours, sometimes too slowly, sometimes too late. But we face them. Trump scoffed, his bravado returning. You think history will side with you? Charles's eyes didn't blink. I don't need history to side with me. I just need it to remember that I didn't stay silent. There was a pause. A kind of reluctant recognition, not of surrender, but of limits. Trump reached for his coat. We'll see what the people think. Charles offered a faint smile. They already are. By the time Trump exited the palace, his team scrambling behind him, headlines were already flooding newsrooms. Trump versus the crown, Charles fights back, monarchy speaks, and the world listens. Outside, crowds had gathered. Not in protest, not in pomp, but in curiosity. Something rare had occurred, power had spoken without pageantry. Inside, Charles returned to his study. He removed the royal sash, placed it on the chair, and looked out across the wet London skyline. He wasn't a perfect man. He wasn't trying to be. But today, he hadn't worn the crown to preserve it. He'd worn it to defend what it meant. Some debates fade with time. This one echoed. When King Charles stood his ground against Donald Trump, it wasn't just about royalty or politics, it was about legacy, restraint, and dignity in an age obsessed with dominance. Trump mocked the crown. But the crown didn't crumble. It spoke. And when it did, it reminded the world that true power isn't loud, it's lasting. If this story made you think, if it stirred something in you, don't scroll past it. Share it. Comment below. And most importantly, subscribe. Because here on Charles Stories, we don't just retell moments. We reframe power. Until the next reckoning, stay curious, stay bold.